I want you to close your eyes and place yourself on the very edge of the world.
Okay.
It is a hot, oppressive summer night on the shores of the Baie de Chaleur, right where New Brunswick meets Quebec.
Yeah.
The air is so humid, it just feels like heavy in your lungs.
Right, that thick coastal heat.
Exactly. And the darkness over the water is absolute. It is a pitch black, freezing abyss. The wind starts to howl, bringing that low, guttural vibration that warns you a massive storm is brewing offshore.
Which is terrifying enough on its own.
It really is. You are staring out into that suffocating black water, and suddenly an impossible light appears.
I mean, it does not behave like a distant lighthouse or, a passing lantern. It's a glow that actively defies the darkness around it.
At first, it looks like a massive hemispherical ball of fire, just like a colossal hot coal resting impossibly on the surface of the freezing ocean.
Yeah.
But as you watch, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the visual, the fire begins to morph. The flames stretch upward, rising into these 30-foot slender columns of blinding red and yellow light.
It's almost like it's building itself.
Yes, and those columns begin to take structural shape. They weave and dance until you are looking at the unmistakable silhouette of a massive three-masted galleon, completely engulfed in a raging inferno.
Oh, wow.
And here is the detail that makes the temperature in the room drop. This burning phantom ship is sailing at full speed, directly against the howling wind.
I mean, it is an image straight out of our most primordial anxieties, a towering inferno on the high seas, completely ignoring the laws of physics, sailing right through a storm.
It strips away any illusion of safety, right?
Completely. The ocean is dangerous enough on its own, but a burning ship that sails against the wind destroys any sense of rationality.
Well, today we are unpacking one of history's most meticulously documented maritime anomalies. We are doing a deep dive into the Chaleur Phantom, also known as the Fireship of Baie de Chaleur.
And we should be clear right off the bat, this isn't just some campfire ghost story.
No, not at all. We are pulling from a really fascinating stack of historical and scientific sources today. We have the meticulous 1905 scientific paper published in the Bulletin of the Natural History Society of New Brunswick.
Right, by the Harvard professor William F. Ganong.
Exactly. We're also examining Eliza Chase's 1904 travelogue, Quest of the Quaint, and we are cross-referencing centuries of maritime archives, lighthouse keeper logs, and meteorological data from the Maritimes.
So our mission today is to treat this phenomenon as a real-world investigative documentary. We want to understand the intersection of human trauma, environmental extremes, and the actual limits of scientific explanation.
Yet we are going to look at the bloody 16th century tragedies that supposedly birthed this curse. We'll look at how an early version of viral fake news infected local memory.
That part is wild.
It really is. And we'll get into the intense biological and physical realities of what happens when the human mind is just pushed to the absolute brink of survival in the North Atlantic.
So let's start with the raw data. Because to understand the grip this phantom has on the coast, we have to look at what people are actually seeing out there.
Right. We aren't dealing with a couple of blurry accounts from, isolated fishermen. We have hundreds of eyewitness accounts spanning over 2 centuries.
And the visual consistency across these sightings is what initially drew scientific attention, Witnesses repeatedly describe that initial glow, the hemispherical hot coal, and then the evolution of the light.
When those 30-foot columns rise up, witnesses describe seeing incredibly specific, intricate details of a ship's rigging.
Yeah, they see the ropes, the masts, the bowsprit, all just vibrating and dancing in this eerie, glowing fire.
And the lore gets intensely visceral, crossing over from just a visual anomaly into full-on auditory hallucination.
Right.
There is this deeply ingrained local belief that if you walk down to the beach on one of these dark nights, take off your shoes and submerge your bare feet into the freezing waters of the Chaleur Bay.
Which sounds miserable.
Right. But if you do it, you will actually hear the echoing screams of passengers burning alive on the decks.
I mean, I find that detail profoundly revealing about human psychology. Having to physically touch the freezing water to hear the screams suggests a deeply held belief that the environment itself is holding on to the trauma.
Like the water is alive.
Exactly. It's almost like the stone tape theory you hear in paranormal research, but applied to water. The ocean is viewed as a massive, liquid recording device, storing the agony of the past.
And you have to physically bridge the gap between land and sea to tap into that playback.
Right, it's so unsettling.
But surely, if you are a pragmatist, your first instinct is to dismiss these witnesses. You assume it's panicked locals or, the power of suggestion.
Sure.
But investigators gathered testimonies from highly credible individuals whose lives literally depended on their observational skills. Take Captain Turner of Riverside.
Yeah, a sea captain in the 19th century is not prone to flights of fancy. Their survival and the survival of their crew depends entirely on their ability to accurately read the horizon, the weather, and the water.
Exactly.
Captain Turner was interviewed at length by investigators, and he analyzed the phantom ship with the clinical eye of a master mariner. He mapped its trajectory, noted its structural impossibilities, and swore on his life that it was a physical presence.
Then you have the account of a woman known in the archives as the Caracat Lady. And her experience sheds so much light on how the brain processes this anomaly.
Tell them about what she saw.
So she looks out her window into the dark, sees this massive flaming apparition on the water, and her immediate thought isn't supernatural. Her brain goes to the most grounded, horrifying reality.
Right, she thinks it's her own husband's schooner.
Yes. She thinks it's his ship burning alive in the night. She raises the alarm, rallying the town for a rescue mission, only to slowly realize the flames are defying the wind and aren't consuming physical wood.
That is such a crucial data point. It really highlights the realism of the light. It doesn't look like some ethereal, translucent spirit.
No, it looks like real fire.
Exactly. It behaves optically like real fire, mimicking the violent consumption of a real vessel, which is why her brain defaulted to a real-world disaster.
And some people didn't just look from the shore. James Harper saw the light pulsating on solid winter ice, so it wasn't restricted to liquid water.
Which changes things completely.
Right. But Robert Wilson's account is the one that really challenges our understanding. He was sailing on the bay on a remarkably dark night, and the light appeared ahead of him.
And he didn't turn around.
No, he sailed directly toward it. He passed within 100 yards of this glowing anomaly.
I mean, passing within 100 yards of an unexplained massive light source on a pitch-black ocean requires a very specific kind of nerve.
Totally.
And his detailed observation from that distance strips away some of the mythology, right? He didn't see phantom sailors. He described it as a glowing half-moon resting flat on the water.
Or sometimes looking exactly like the hull of a vessel with a bowsprit, but missing its masts entirely.
Yeah, he noted it was vibrating, dancing, and occasionally it would just instantly vanish in the blink of an eye.
I have to ask, though, if Robert Wilson got that close and only saw a glowing half-moon, how do we get to the hyper-specific horrors of something like the Heron Island incident?
Oh, man.
Because in 1878, Mrs. Pettigrew experienced something that completely shatters the boundary between an optical illusion on the water and a physical threat.
Yes. The Heron Island incident is where the phenomenon steps out of the ocean and forcefully occupies domestic space.
I want to paint the picture for you. It's a summer dusk. The sun has just gone down, leaving that heavy, oppressive purple twilight. Mrs. Pettigrew is standing alone on the veranda of her farmhouse on Heron Island.
So isolated.
Very. The house is isolated. The only sounds are the wind and the lapping water. Suddenly, a figure appears at the corner of her house. It's a sailor. But as he steps closer, the horror really sets in. He is glowing, and his flesh is covered in agonizing, severe burns. He looks directly at her, begging for help, pleading with her to tend to his wounds.
The psychological violation of that moment is immense. The horror of the ocean, which is usually kept at a safe distance, has crossed the threshold right onto her porch.
She panics, which is the only rational response. She turns to bolt back inside her house to lock the doors. But as she turns, the burning sailor brushes right past her.
Ugh.
The sources say she felt the unnatural chill or heat of him. And as he moves past, she looks down, and her brain completely short-circuits. She realizes the man has no legs. He's just a floating torso of burned flesh.
It is a devastating, surreal image.
I really want to unpack the mechanics of that fear. It's like that sudden drop in a nightmare, you know?
Yeah.
When you're dreaming and everything makes a twisted kind of sense, you're interacting with a person, and then suddenly the rules of reality just snap. You notice a detail like missing legs that plunges you into pure irrational terror. What happens to the human psyche when a distant light on the water suddenly walks onto your front porch and asks for medical attention?
I mean, it induces a profound cognitive dissonance. When a threat remains out on the water, it is contained within its natural environment. We expect the ocean to be dangerous.
Sure.
But when that horror physically occupies your domestic space, your brain has no pre-existing defense mechanism. You are simultaneously dealing with the innate human empathy to help someone in severe pain and the overwhelming primal terror of encountering something that defies biology and physics.
It causes a psychological fracture.
Exactly. It breaks your brain for a second.
In these sightings, these intense psychological fractures, they demand an origin. What catastrophic event could leave such a profound scar on the region that people are seeing burned, legless men on their porches?
To find out, we have to travel back over 500 years.
Right, to the year 1500 or 1501, right on the heels of Columbus and Cabot. The Atlantic Ocean at this time is the most dangerous, unforgiving frontier on the planet.
Which brings us to a Portuguese explorer named Gaspar Corte-Real. He was born into immense wealth and privilege, operating within a Portuguese empire that was aggressively expanding its maritime reach.
Right.
Corte-Real was driven by immense hubris and a singular consuming obsession discovering the Northwest Passage to India and China.
And we really need to contextualize what a transatlantic voyage was actually like in the 16th century. The historical records paint a grim, grim picture. It wasn't some grand swashbuckling adventure.
Yeah, not at all.
It was sustained environmental horror. Imagine being trapped on a caravel or a carrack, which is essentially a dark, damp, rotting wooden prison cell constantly pitching in the waves.
And the smell alone.
Oh, the smell must have been unbearable. The fog in the North Atlantic is so thick it feels like wet wool pressed against your face.
Yeah.
We have no GPS, no radio, no reliable way to calculate longitude. If you get blown off course, you just drift until you starve.
The psychological toll of that environment is extreme. The crew is surrounded by an endless, freezing abyss. The bilge water below decks is putrid. Fresh water turns foul within weeks.
Yeah.
Scurvy begins to break down the collagen in their bodies, causing their teeth to fall out and old wounds to reopen. The creeping terror of disorientation and starvation breeds deep paranoia. By the time they sight land, these men are deeply traumatized and highly volatile.
So Corte-Real and his fleet finally hit land. They find fresh water, endless timber, and they encounter the indigenous people of the region, likely Inuit or Beothuk communities.
And at first, the interactions are reportedly cautious but peaceful. They trade.
But Corte-Real isn't there for timber. He is looking for gold, expensive spices, and fine silks to justify the massive financial cost of his expedition back in Lisbon. When he realizes he's not in Asia and there is no gold, his arrogance just takes over.
It is a stark pivot from exploration to exploitation. Finding no material wealth to extract, Corte-Real makes the cold, calculated decision to extract human capital instead. He decides to recoup his losses by kidnapping the local population to sell into the European slave trade.
He unleashes his heavily armed men on the local population. They violently kidnap 57 indigenous men, women, and children. They drag them from their homes and throw them into the dark, stinking holds of the Portuguese ships.
It is a horrific atrocity.
It really is.
Yeah.
But Corte-Real severely underestimates the tactical capabilities and the resolve of the people he has just assaulted. As his fleet prepares to flee the bay with their human cargo, the indigenous warriors mount a highly organized, desperate rescue mission.
The lore describes a massive fleet of indigenous war canoes descending upon the Portuguese ships. It is a quest for righteous vengeance and the recovery of their families.
I want to slow down and reconstruct the sheer chaos of this minute-by-minute disaster. 2 of the Portuguese ships managed to cut their anchors and escape into the fog.
Right.
But Corte-Real's flagship, weighed down and slower, is surrounded. The canoes swarm the galleon. Warriors scale the wooden sides. A brutal, close-quarters battle erupts on the decks.
Just absolute chaos.
There is the clash of steel against bone, the screaming, the absolute terror of the captives locked in the hold below, listening to the slaughter above them. And in the frenzy of this fight, a lantern is smashed or a torch is dropped on the deck.
And those ships were highly flammable.
Exactly. The ship is heavily coated in pitch and tar for waterproofing, so it catches fire instantly.
Now we enter the ultimate locked room horror scenario, but the room is a burning platform surrounded by a deadly ocean. A ship fire is a sailor's worst nightmare because the flames spread through the rigging and the tarred wood with terrifying speed. There is nowhere to retreat.
Imagine being a Portuguese sailor in that exact moment. You are caught in a raging, inescapable inferno. The heat is blistering your skin. The smoke is blinding you. You are being attacked from all sides.
Right.
Your only option, your only exit, is to leap off the burning deck into the frigid black depths of the North Atlantic. You have to choose between burning alive or freezing and drowning in the dark.
What a choice.
As the ship is consumed, as the men throw themselves into the freezing water to die, the legend says they cursed the bay. With their dying breaths, choking on smoke and seawater, they vowed the ship would burn in those waters for 1,000 years.
The physics and psychology of a ship fire in these specific conditions are profoundly, deeply unsettling. The immediate contrast between the intense, searing heat of the flames and the shocking, paralyzing cold of the ocean water creates a physiological sensory overload that is almost impossible to comprehend.
Your body just wouldn't know what to do.
The body shuts down. And the idea of a curse born from that specific, intense level of agony, a 1,000-year sentence of eternal burning, is a way for folklore to try and encapsulate a trauma that is too massive for normal history to contain.
And the lore insists this wasn't just a localized event that washed away with the tide. The grim physical evidence of this atrocity is allegedly woven directly into the soil of the region.
Tell them about the bodies.
The bodies of the victims, the Portuguese sailors who drowned, and the indigenous captives who tragically couldn't escape the burning hold, supposedly washed ashore on Heron Island. They were found and buried in shallow, unmarked mass graves in a low-lying area on the west tip of the island known as French Woods.
Which brings a tangible forensic element to the ghost story. When local residents walk through French Woods, they aren't just walking through a coastal forest, they believe they are walking over the bones of the murdered.
It grounds the supernatural in something real.
Exactly. This grounds the spectral light they see on the water in a physical reality of historical injustice.
But wait, if we look at the broader maritime archives of the region, the Corte-Real story is just one explanation. The sheer isolation and the unforgiving nature of the North Atlantic bred multiple competing nightmares to explain the flames of the Chaleur fandom. Why do you think that is? Do we just invent these curses because a random, violent natural disaster is too difficult to accept? Do we have to invent a moral reason, like a murder or a kidnapping, to explain why a ship burns? Because a universe where bad things happen for absolutely no reason is just too scary.
I mean, that touches on the core sociological function of folklore. The ocean is chaotic and indifferent.
Yeah.
A rogue wave, a sudden squall, or a random lightning strike can destroy a ship and kill 100 men in minutes with zero moral justification.
Yeah.
That randomness is psychologically unbearable for communities whose entire livelihood depends on the sea. By attaching a narrative of hubris, betrayal, or a specific curse to the burning ship, the local population regains a sense of order.
So it's about control.
Exactly. The universe is no longer random. It operates on a discernible system of crime and cosmic punishment.
That makes total sense when you look at the other dark legends that sprouted up. Let's look at the doomed brother narrative.
Oh, right.
The story goes that a year after the massacre, in 1502, Gaspar Corte-Real's brother, Miguel, arrives in the bay, desperately searching for the missing flagship. He meets the exact same violent fate. He is attacked, his ship is set ablaze, and he joins the eternal flames, essentially creating a family legacy of eternal torment.
It amplifies the original curse. It suggests that the land itself was so deeply violated by the initial kidnapping that the vengeance extends to the entire bloodline of the perpetrator. The land rejects them permanently.
Then you have the pirate's curse, localized near Port Daniel. The archives state a gang of ruthless pirates was operating in the area, and they brutally murdered a local woman.
Okay.
But with her dying breath, she looked at her killers and cast a vicious curse. For as long as the world is, may you burn on the bay.
Notice the shift in power dynamics there, right? In the Corte-Real story, the curse is cast by the dying sailors in their agony. In the pirate story, the curse is a weapon wielded by the innocent victim against the wicked.
Ah, I see.
The flames on the bay transition from a symbol of agony into a symbol of eternal, inescapable justice.
And my favorite of these alternate legends is the story of the murdered sailor. A ship is heading out to sea, and a terrible storm hits. The crew is paralyzed by paranoia.
Which happens a lot in these tight quarters.
Right. In their madness, they decide that one of their own crewmates is a jinx, a harbinger of bad luck. So they brutally murder him and throw him overboard to appease the ocean. But the sacrifice backfires.
It always does.
The ship catches fire and burns to the waterline. The locals deemed it to be Catholic blood reaping its vengeance for the sin of murder.
This taps deeply into the concept of the Jonah, a person who brings the wrath of God or nature to a ship. It is an ancient maritime trope.
Right.
When a crew is isolated in a storm, the societal rules that govern normal behavior break down completely. Murdering a crewmate is the ultimate violation of the Maritime Brotherhood. The burning ship becomes a monument to their moral collapse.
There's even a connection made to a documented historical tragedy, the wreck of the Lady Colborne in 1838, where locals suggest the ghost light is the lingering echo of that very real, documented disaster.
All of these recurring themes, human error, extreme isolation, terrible cruelty, and moral failing, serve as parables. There are warnings designed to teach sailors to behave morally because the ocean is always watching and it does not forgive.
But I want to throw a massive wrench into all of these narratives. We have a bay overflowing with ghostly lore, but what if the most famous of these origin stories, the kidnapping, the battle, the thousand-year curse of Gaspar Corte-Real, wasn't born from the deep, dark ocean at all?
Yeah.
What if it was born from a calculated manipulation of the truth?
This is where the historical record dramatically subverts the folklore. The deeply entrenched Gaspar Corte-Real ghost story, the specific narrative that shaped the cultural identity of the Baie de Chaleur, was largely fabricated.
Let's talk about the fiction infection. In 1904, an author from Philadelphia named Eliza Chase published a book called Quest of the Quaint.
Right.
She was writing a travelogue, but she was also a master of what we would now call viral marketing. She wanted a bestseller. And she knew that to make a ghost story truly compelling, you have to anchor it in verifiable reality.
So she applied a very specific formula. She took real historical facts, right? Gaspar Corte-Real was a real explorer. He really did kidnap 57 indigenous people in the year 1500 or 1501.
Right.
And he really did vanish without a trace. However, historical evidence heavily suggests he vanished off the coast of Newfoundland or Cape Breton, not the Baie de Chaleur in New Brunswick.
But Eliza Chase didn't let geography ruin a great plot. She coldly grafted that real historical tragedy onto the entirely separate, very real phenomenon of the unexplained lights in the Baie de Chaleur.
Exactly.
She baked the tragedy and the visual anomaly together into a fictional, moralistic tale of righteous vengeance. She published Quest of the Quaint, and it exploded. It became a massive bestseller. And this is where it gets insidious. Her fictional story was so perfectly suited to the eerie atmosphere of the Bay that it infected the local folklore.
It is a stunning example of how literature can overwrite oral tradition. The local people already had their own legends, the pirate, the murdered sailor. But Chase's story was so dramatic, so grand in its scope, that it simply consumed the older narrative.
Wow.
People read her book, and within a generation, they were telling the Corte-Real story as if it were a historical fact passed down from their great-grandfathers.
Hold on. I need to connect this to how we consume information today, because this is wild. The thousand-year curse, the foundation of this region's nightmare, is essentially 19th century fake news.
Yep.
A woman in Philadelphia just manufactured it for profit, and the locals bought it so completely they overwrote their own history. It reminds me of how a compelling, emotionally charged narrative on social media today can completely erase complex, nuanced facts in a matter of hours.
Exactly. When a narrative perfectly validates our underlying fears or desires, we rarely fact-check it. Chase gave the people a thrilling, morally satisfying explanation for the terrifying lights on their bay, and they adopted it as reality.
But that leaves us with a massive problem. If the backstory is fiction, if Gaspar Corte-Real never burned in that bay, then what exactly were all those experienced sea captains, the lighthouse keepers, and Mrs. Pettigrew actually looking at?
That is the crux of the mystery. Stripped of the Portuguese curse, the terrifying reality remains. The light itself is undeniably real.
Right.
It is a physical phenomenon interacting with the environment. The ghost story was debunked, but the ghost was still there. And because the folklore had been compromised by Eliza Chase, it was time for science to step in and hunt the phantom.
Which brings us to William F. Ganong in 1905. The scientific community is obsessed with classifying the natural world, and Ganong sends his sights on the Baie de Chaleur. Ganong is a fascinating character.
Oh, he really is.
He's a brilliant 41-year-old Harvard professor and botanist. He is also the heir to the massive Ganong chocolate empire in New Brunswick.
Which is such a funny detail.
Right. He could have spent his life in absolute luxury, eating candy, but he chose the grueling, muddy life of a field scientist.
And Ganong is exactly the kind of mind required for this investigation. He is a fierce empiricist. He has zero patience for the supernatural.
Zero.
He famously dismissed ghosts as weird fantasies which are preferred to truth even by grown-up persons. He approaches the Chaleur phantom with a profound, almost clinical annoyance that a local superstition is defying rational explanation.
So Ganong travels to the bay and implements a rigorous, boots-on-the-ground methodology. He doesn't just stare at the water, he interviews the people. He sifts through decades of panic testimonies.
Yeah.
He actively tosses out accounts that reek of exaggeration or instances where he suspects a local is just trying to mess with the fancy Harvard professor.
He isolates the core irrefutable data points. He notes that if physical light is frequently seen, it occurs in all seasons, importantly, including the dead of winter over solid ice.
Which rules out a lot of water-based theories.
Exactly. It is almost always preceded by a significant drop in barometric pressure and an incoming storm, and its shape often transitions from a low, glowing hemisphere to tall, vibrating columns of light.
Once he has the raw data, Ganong and his colleagues start throwing scientific theories at the wall. Let's break down their proposed natural explanations. First up, we have G.L. Ellis, a geologist from Cambridge.
Okay.
Ellis looks at the data and argues it's simple. It's marsh gas, also known as ignis fatuus or will-o'-the-wisp.
Right. Marsh gas is essentially methane produced by the anaerobic decay of organic matter in bogs and marshes. Occasionally, through a complex chemical reaction, often involving phosphine, it can spontaneously combust when it interacts with oxygen in the air, creating a faint, flickering blue or yellow light.
Okay.
Ellis speculated that massive pockets of this methane were drifting over the freezing waters of the Baie and igniting.
But wait, marsh gas? Methane doesn't just spontaneously explode into 30-foot columns of roaring flame without a catalyst. And marsh gas usually creates tiny flickers, right?
Yeah, tiny ones.
If you are a sea captain, you aren't mistaking a tiny flicker of methane for a massive galleon. It feels like Ellis was trying to cram the data into a box that didn't fit.
Ganong agreed. The scale was entirely wrong for methane. So then Dr. J. Orrin Green, a highly respected professor from Harvard Medical School, weighs in. He actually witnessed the light himself. He concludes that it is entirely electrical in nature, linked to the severe storms that plague the Baie.
Which leads William Ganong to his grand triumphant conclusion. Ganong synthesizes the data, the weather patterns, and the visual descriptions, and declares that the fireship of Baie de Chaleur is a massive, unprecedented display of St. Elmo's fire.
Right. St. Elmo's fire is a well-documented weather phenomenon involving a continuous electrical spark. It is a luminous plasma created by a coronal discharge from a sharp object in a strong atmospheric electrical field, such as those generated by thunderstorms.
Let me try to break that down for you, because we need to explain how coronal discharge actually works on an atomic level to understand what these people were seeing. During a severe storm, the atmosphere becomes highly charged. There's a massive voltage difference between the clouds and the ground, or in this case, the water. When that electric field is strong enough, it actually strips electrons away from the gas molecules in the air.
Yeah.
This process turns the air, which is normally an insulator, into a conductor. It becomes plasma.
Exactly. And this plasma tends to form around pointed objects like the tip of a ship's mast or a lightning rod because the electrical field is highly concentrated at sharp points. The gas molecules in the plasma release energy in the form of visible light, usually a bright blue or violet glow.
Okay, so imagine you are at a science museum and they have one of those glass plasma globes. You touch the glass and these glowing, bright purple tendrils of electrical plasma shoot out to your fingertips.
Classic science museum stuff.
Right. Now scale that plasma globe up to the size of a three-masted ship. Imagine millions of volts of atmospheric electricity discharging over the open water, creating a colossal, vibrating, glowing structure of raw plasma floating towards you in the dark.
It is a terrifying natural event, and it perfectly explains why witnesses describe the light as vibrating and dancing. Plasma in a highly charged atmospheric field reacts to wind and magnetic shifts exactly like that. It moves, it flickers, and it can vanish instantly when the electrical field equalizes.
I follow the physics of the plasma. A giant ball of atmospheric electricity is scary. But I have a major problem with this explanation.
What's that?
Why do hundreds of sane people look at a ball of electricity and swear on their lives that they are seeing a wooden ship with ropes, sails, and a bowsprit? Why did Mrs. Pettigrew see a burned, legless man instead of just a ball of lightning in her yard?
It's a fair question.
Right. I struggle to buy that 3 people on a boat see a flaming mast and all hallucinate the exact same structural details simultaneously.
That is where the physics of plasma must be paired with the psychology of perception. We have to discuss the terrifying power of the human brain, specifically a phenomenon called pareidolia.
Pareidolia.
Right. Pareidolia is the psychological tendency to impose a meaningful interpretation onto a nebulous or random visual stimulus.
Like seeing shapes in the clouds or the man in the moon.
Yes, but weaponize that psychological tendency with intense fear and cultural priming. Place the witness in an extreme survival situation. They are standing on a dark, freezing shore. A violent storm is approaching.
Yeah.
The air pressure is dropping rapidly, and the atmosphere is highly electrically charged, which physiologically can induce feelings of intense dread and paranoia in humans. They are cold, isolated, and terrified. Suddenly, a massive, glowing, shifting column of plasma erupts on the water. The human brain cannot process raw, towering plasma. It scrambles to find a reference point to understand the threat.
And because this is a maritime community, steeped in centuries of folklore, shipwreck tragedies, and Eliza Chase's viral ghost story,
The brain pulls the most terrifying, relevant image it has from its database. It takes those random dancing columns of electrical light and it paints a ship onto the fire. It fills in the rigging, it hallucinates the bowsprit, it constructs the tragedy in real time to make the impossible visual input make sense. The brain essentially says, I see fire on the water, therefore there must be a ship burning.
that makes a lot of sense.
And as for shared sightings, cultural priming explains a lot. If one person yells, look, the phantom ship, the other brains in the boat immediately adopt that framework to process the light.
So, Mrs. Pettigrew was likely looking at a highly localized, anomalous electrical discharge right near her home. But her brain, primed by isolation, fear, and local legends of burned sailors, manifested a terrifying, burned, legless figure to explain the glowing anomaly on her porch.
Exactly.
Is the ultimate collaboration between natural phenomena and psychological terror.
Mm.
Our own minds betray us to make sense of the world.
It is a brilliant, elegant scientific solution. It accounts for the physics, the weather patterns, and the human psychology all at once.
And William F. Ganong knows it. He returns to New Brunswick in January, right after his investigation, and he delivers a triumphant presentation to the Royal Natural History Society in St. John.
The room goes wild.
He is praised as a scientific hero. He took a centuries-old horror story that terrified thousands of people, and he neatly packed it away into the boxes of St. Elmo's fire and pareidolia. Case closed. The monster is dead.
But that is not where the story ends. Because William Ganong, despite the applause and the accolades, harbored a terrifying, lingering doubt.
He was a true scientist.
Yes, and a true scientist requires comparative data. He couldn't just assume his theory was correct. He needed to prove that this scale of St. Elmo's fire happened elsewhere.
Right. The scientific method requires reproducibility. If the atmospheric conditions of a severe thunderstorm create giant plasma ships in the Baie de Chaleur, they should be creating giant plasma ships in other bays around the world. So secretly, before his big presentation, Ganong had written letters to prominent meteorologists, naturalists, and scientific institutions across Europe and North America, asking them for comparable examples of massive, ship-sized plasma discharges.
And here's the final chilling twist of our deep dive. The responses to his letters came back, and they were universally negative.
Wait, nothing.
Complete silence from the global scientific community. Nowhere else in the world in any recorded scientific literature does St. Elmo's fire manifest on such a massive, sustained scale that it perfectly mimics a burning, dancing ship. The phenomenon is entirely localized to the Baie de Chaleur.
The unsettling nature of this realization is heavy. Think about what that means. Science marched into the dark, pointed a flashlight at the monster, and essentially said, don't worry, we know exactly what this is. It's just a normal atmospheric plasma discharge paired with pareidolia.
Right.
But when science was asked to prove that this normal thing happens anywhere else on planet Earth, the ocean just stayed dead silent. It refused to cooperate.
It means the science fell short. Ganong's explanation was the best rational attempt of the 20th century, but it couldn't fully account for the unique, massive scale of the Chaleur phantom. The anomaly remains entirely isolated, deeply unexplained, and utterly baffling.
Yeah.
It means that whatever is happening in that bay, whether it's an undiscovered meteorological quirk, a unique geological interaction, or something we haven't even conceptualized yet, it is happening only there.
So where does that leave us? We've looked at the panic witnesses, the bloody 16th century atrocities, the fabricated viral curses of Eliza Chase, and the failed attempts of Harvard scientists to put the ghost in a box.
It's a lot to process.
It makes you reflect on why shipwreck stories and ghost ships continue to terrify and fascinate us so deeply, even today.
I think it comes down to the ultimate confrontation between the vulnerability of the soft, fragile human body and the massive, uncaring, infinite scale of the ocean.
Beautifully said.
The sea is essentially an alien environment right here on our planet. It does not care about our history or morality or our scientific classifications. Ghost ships represent our deepest fear that the ocean doesn't just kill us, it consumes us. It traps us in an eternal cycle of our worst final moments.
We want to believe that when we die at sea, it's over. But the Phantom ship suggests the ocean doesn't let you go. Whether the Chaleur Phantom is an unclassified plasma storm, drifting methane gas, or the psychic echoes of a 16th century kidnapping, the truth is that the Baie is holding on to its secrets. It refuses to be categorized by our science or our stories.
And perhaps that is the true horror. Not that the ship is cursed, but that we are utterly powerless to understand the forces generating it. We are just tiny observers standing on the shore, watching the physics of the universe do something impossible.
I want to leave you with a final, haunting thought to mull over the next time you find yourself staring out into the dark, whether that's over the ocean or just out your back window. We talked about pareidolia, the idea that the human mind is projecting the image of a burning ship onto a random electrical storm. The mind paints the canvas. But what if we have the dynamic backward?
What do you mean?
What if the unique, highly specific atmospheric chemistry and geophysics of the Baie de Chaleur isn't just creating a blank canvas of light? What if the Baie itself is acting like a massive environmental photograph?
Oh, wow.
What if the intense energy of that Baie is somehow endlessly replaying the horrific final moments of a doomed crew, burning the image of their agony into the very air itself, night after night, century after century?
I mean, if the environment itself has the capacity to record trauma, then the Phantom isn't a trick of the mind, it's a physical scar on the atmosphere. And we are just bearing witness to a playback we can't turn off.
So the next time the wind starts to howl and the air turns freezing cold and you find yourself standing on the pitch-black shores of the Baie de Chaleur, keep your shoes on. You might not want to know what the water is trying to tell you.